The campaign in Marvel's Avengers is a very well told, if predictable, story of the team's fall and rise, and smartly uses its latest recruit Kamala Khan as the lens through which we experience it. Unfortunately, the campaign acts more as a stepping stone to the live-serviced post-game multiplayer than I would have liked, and the weakest parts of it are easily the ones that are most connected to that content, which stunt the experience every time you run into them. Avengers takes place after the death of Captain America, who died during what was meant to be a day of celebration for the team. An unveiling of a new helicarrier, the Chimera, is sabotaged by Taskmaster and his henchmen, causing the Terrigen crystal powering the warship to explode, destroying a large portion of San Francisco and turning many of its survivors into super-powered Inhumans. In the 5 years since this day, the corporation Advanced Idea Mechanics have stepped in to clean up the mess and have promised a cure for what they consider the Inhuman disease. I've been critical of the A-Day opening to the game the times I've played it during hands-on events in the beta. However, I was delighted to find that the game opens up a little bit before the gameplay sequence with an exploratory section featuring a young Kamala, where she has been invited to A-Day thanks to winning an Avengers fanfiction contest. Setting Kamala from the jump as the center of the story and giving her small moments with each of her heroes before jumping into the Golden Gate Bridge battle gives some much appreciated context that flipped my opinions on the sequence 180 degrees. From there, the campaign in the first act really focuses on Kamala and her transition from teenage girl to Miss Marvel as she seeks out a resistance to provide them with what she believes to be proof that George Tarleton, the founder of AIM, was the person behind everything that went wrong on A-Day. The first few levels are undeniably traditional Crystal dynamics and are more like the developers' Tomb Raider games than I expected, which is to say they are very good. Kamala goes on to find Bruce Banner, who she partners with in search of Tony Stark. All of this stuff is fantastic, and we get some amazing writing for all the characters, each of which have ended up in different places with different feelings on how A-Day and its aftermath went. It's after this section when the game pivots slightly from the linear Tomb Raider-like experience to the more open live service style gameplay, and that's when things start to get a little murky. The story is still really enjoyable, and at points returns to focusing on Kamala and having more unique linear missions, but the game cuts back significantly on them to tie in the Warzone levels from the multiplayer. Replacing well-performed, emotionally resonant cutscenes are in-game character models stiffly standing around the war table as Tony Stark's AI Jarvis provides exposition about yet another MacGuffin the team needs and will have to infiltrate an AIM base to acquire. It really stunts the narrative, making up most of the game's second act before returning to the more interesting narrative-focused missions in the third. Ultimately, when the dust settled, I enjoyed the campaign, and it does a phenomenal job of not only introducing Kamala, but having her grow into the hero Miss Marvel, and showing why the team needed her to save the world. The story also has some nice surprises, including Easter eggs and character reveals, although I wish more supervillains from the comics were included, with Taskmaster and Abomination really being all we get. The Avengers have an incredibly diverse rogues gallery, and the fact that AIM robots are frequently the bosses at the end of levels instead of a minor villain is disappointing. Kamala's mission to reassemble the Avengers takes you to a myriad of different locations and throws many obstacles for her to overcome in her way. In that sense, the game is way more first Avengers film than the shocking Infinity War and Endgame. Speaking of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the game takes a tremendous amount of cues from it. This includes abilities and moves ripped right off of the screen, to lines of dialogue that are nearly verbatim spoken in the films. What's weird though is at points the game tries to subvert norms set by the movies with witty quips, almost as if Crystal Dynamics was saying, "See, we're not the MCU." The game sits in this halfway spot of being its own thing, thanks to Kamala and the characters having different arcs than their film counterparts, and the films in an alternate universe. It's not necessarily a problem, but it does itself no favors with players that have been put off by its quote-unquote knock-off MCU design. When it comes to that design with the presentation and gameplay, Crystal Dynamics impresses as per usual. Running the game on PS4 Pro, with some frame hitches during big bombastic sequences, the game is dazzling in 4K HDR, and the motion capture during cutscenes is top tier. Each of the characters shares a similar control scheme, but they for the most part feel different. While Kamala stands out due to her very unique abilities rarely explored in games, no single character feels unworthy of playtime, and they all feel immensely satisfying to control. There are a few bugs I ran into, but we'll get into those for my multiplayer review, which will be releasing sometime after launch weekend when I've had time to dig further into that content. Is Avengers worth playing for those solely looking for the single-player story? I want to say yes, because it's very good, but it delves too much into the multiplayer design to recommend it. I don't think you have to be committed to the multiplayer to pick up the game, but you have to have an open mind about it. If you do, there's a lot more to love than hate in Marvel's Avengers.